Welcome to another episode of
Hi, Tzili.
Hi, Tzip. Hi, Dan
Hi.
Schneider. And we're going to talk today about freedom of speech. So tell us exactly what is that you're doing.
Well, I work at the Media Research Center. I focus most of my efforts on protecting free speech rights in America. Under our Constitution, it's a bit unique around the world. We have a First Amendment that, of course, protects both freedom of the speech by individuals as well as freedom of the press. And I can get into that in detail if you like.
Yes.
Sort of the history behind that. But I don't want to bore you with those cool glasses.
But what do you mean by freedom of speech of the press?
Well, the press, in our First Amendment, there are 5 elements. The first is the freedom to express religion as your conscience dictates. The second is freedom of speech for individuals. And that may seem a little redundant to you, but I'll explain why that's really important a little later. Third is freedom of the press. And then there's freedom of assembly and petitioning our government for grievances. But our founders did not create the right to freedom of speech. Rather, our founders understood that we have an inherent God-given right to speak, and particularly to express our opinion in opposition to both government and other sort of powerful entities. That the individual has a right to be heard. The freedom of the press is not based on an understanding of God-given rights, but rather an understanding that for our country to function properly, there needs to be an avenue outside of government to hold it accountable. And that's supposed to be the press's job. So while the press does not have a constitutional requirement to engage in this sort of holding the powerful elites accountable, they have a responsibility to do so.
However, okay. But the big roof of freedom of speech, everybody can use it as they like, and they can always protect themselves and say, well, it's freedom of speech, it's freedom of speech. Is there anybody that is sitting on this roof and direct it or somehow
red lines
navigate the whole free of speech system?
Tzili, I'm missing your question. Is there somebody sitting on the roof?
Like, the roof of freedom of speech. This is just
the limits. Are you talking about like the upper limits?
There is a big umbrella that it's like the freedom of speech, and there are many opponents, underneath that are using it. Is there anybody above this roof that basically is conducting or watching over or supervising? Because everybody can say, yeah, but under freedom of speech, I can say anything. Where is the limit?
I really like how you framed this question. No constitutional right is absolute. There's going to be a limit on every single one of our rights. Even when our Bill of Rights says, shall not be abridged. Well, no, oftentimes these rights, or every time these rights are abridged in some way. Somehow they're regulated. And that's necessary because sometimes my rights will conflict with yours. Or sometimes, Tzili, your rights will conflict with Tzipi's rights. So when there's that conflict, when our rights collide, what body is best positioned to arbitrate those rights?
Right.
Well, I think there are 2 bodies that are appropriate for that. And they're both subject to the political process in one way or another. One would be a legislature in the United States. That'd be our U.S. Congress, that after hearings and debate, could flesh out what are these conflicts and how best do we balance these conflicts so that in the end we still have the best way for people to express their views, including views that people find obnoxious or offensive. The other body, of course, is the court system. The courts are designed, and one of our early jurists on the Supreme Court said it is, in fact, the duty of the Supreme Court to determine what the law is, what these limitations are. What I don't like is when executive branch officials step in and decide unilaterally what is going to be appropriate for us or not.
Give us an example.
Well, it's not Joe Biden's decision. He is the president of the United States. He is not to be the arbiter of where my speech rights conflict with yours and how to resolve them. Yet that's what we see today. Joe Biden is doing a lot of that kind of work. And I mentioned to you that the media has a right within our First Amendment, and that's specifically to hold the elites accountable. But our individual rights are designed specifically so that we can oppose government, so that we can oppose corporate CEOs, so we can oppose those who have more power than we do. Speech is the weapon that we have against those who have much more power. However, just recently before the United States Supreme Court, the state attorneys general from Missouri and Louisiana brought a case against the Biden administration. The Biden administration is both colluding and even coercing big tech to silence us. And the Biden administration in the Supreme Court made the argument that the government has a First Amendment free speech right. And that governmental free speech right includes silencing individuals. Well, this turns the First Amendment completely upside down.
Right.
It's how the voiceless and the minority can in fact push back on government when we think the government is being too intrusive or not acting aggressively enough. It's the individual's ability to speak and have their voice heard that is so important against government. So to argue that the Bill of Rights, which again was designed for individuals, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, they're designed for individual rights to protect us against the federal government. Yet the Biden administration is arguing just the opposite. Frankly, it shocks the conscience.
What is your take on what's going on now in the campuses?
Oh,
in terms of freedom of speech.
Yeah, because I'm a professor at NYU, and it's really becoming difficult. And I want to tell you something that the president of NYU, right, waited quite a bit before she called the police.
mm-hmm.
But she called the police when some lines were crossed, like violence. Not even the slow, terrible, from my point of view, some, very few, but still terrible slogans and shouting, which ended up to death to Israel or death to the Jews,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is the limit. So here she did call the police, right?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to these campus protesters, and I prefer to call them a much more obnoxious term because I don't like what they're saying. I'm Jewish myself, and you could call me a Zionist as well.
Me too.
There are two aspects. One is the legal aspect, and the other is university policy. When it comes to the legal aspect, especially when you're on a public university campus, unlike NYU, if you're at Kansas University or you're at Michigan University, those are agencies of state government. You have even more rights there. Government shall not impinge our right to speech. So if you're on a university campus, you've got more rights to say offensive things, so long as you're not engaged in something that will cause imminent harm. Now, what we see on these campuses, whether they're public universities or private, is that it's not merely speech, it's conduct.
Right.
Conduct is not protected by the First Amendment. When you see these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protesters or the Hamas collaborators, they are blocking access of students. I've seen them surround students, essentially incarcerating them. I'm a graduate of Columbia Law School, and we saw these Hamas collaborators, some of whom were college students, most of whom were not. Most of them were outside agitators.
Right.
But they actually took janitors hostage. That is a federal crime. The whole trespass, that's a crime. Battering students, assaulting them with language. There's free speech rights, but you cannot assault is actually a verbal attack on somebody. Battery is the physical attack. You can't verbally attack somebody in this manner. That's a crime. So there is a line between protected free speech and conduct. And clearly what we see over and over again on all these campuses is that line has been crossed. Now, at Florida, the University of Florida, and at Princeton, I understand, the university presidents there were very clear from the outset what speech is protected by the First Amendment and school policy and what is not. And I don't think we've seen on either of those campuses violence and criminal conduct. If pro-Palestinian students want to get up and say things that may be offensive, objectionable, even like harms my sensibilities, well, that's still protected by the First Amendment. But that's not the question here. We see criminal conduct here.
Yeah.
Do you think bringing the cops to the campus is helping it or pushing it?
Inflaming.
Yeah, I've seen some of these pro-Hamas collaborators say that by bringing the police on campus, they've only exacerbated the problem. And I've got to chuckle a little bit. If I'm diagnosed with cancer, I'm going to want to cut it out. I don't want it to fester in my body. If I use radiation and start hitting that cancer and it's reacting and it sort of inflames the cancer while it's killing it, well, that's a necessary thing to protect my health and safety. When crimes are being committed, the innocent need to be protected. Now, as far as I can tell, when police have been brought on these campuses, they've exercised their authority and responsibility prudently. I've not seen students being gratuitously
Right.
harmed or attacked by these police officers. These police officers have exercised more than sufficient restraint to protect the innocent.
How would you handle the situation in the campus?
Well, again, Ben Sass, President Sass down at the University of Florida, and the Princeton president, they both issued letters at the very outset saying, we support free speech, and here are the contours of free speech. Time, place, and manner is permissible. However, what is not permissible, and then there's a list of what is not permissible under the law, which includes attacking students. And then both of these presidents laid out school policy. You cannot have tents that are up overnight. You can't have sleeping bags. These are school policies. And both of those presidents said, so long as you're in compliance with the law and our policies, you can say whatever you want. However, you break these rules, there will be consequences.
Well,
it's very clear.
It's true about when you talk about students only, but if you have those who enter and they're not students, they will never get these letters, and
they're trespassing. They have no right to be on
right there. You have a problem.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So about the press, when the founders, as you call them, they perceived press as something else than today. Press was supposed to do what you said. They have a function, important function, but not anymore. Now, it's like each channel has it's all political. And somehow this profession lost the compass. So how can they go onto the umbrella even of free speech or not?
Yeah, the press has actually always been pretty partisan since even before our nation's founding. The press, each political party had media that was pretty much aligned with them. One difference, however, is that unlike earlier when the press was kind of evenly numbered along with the parties, Today, the media skews heavily in one direction. But you're right, regardless, the media, the press, they are no longer fulfilling their responsibility under the Constitution.
Right.
I cannot stress to you how bad this is, that the media has abandoned this role, its important responsibility. The very reason that they were granted this right under our Constitution to have this kind of freedom, so that they can hold the incumbent powerful elites to account, regardless of whether they're university presidents, elected officials, heads of big corporations. The role of the media under our Constitution is that, and our media today is not doing that.
Right. So free speech is actually no meaning. Press.
It has a meaning that it is a little bit empty because
Not
they
a
do
little
what
bit,
they
it's
want.
empty.
Yeah.
So, just from your experience, if you can advise me. So, I'm teaching now 3 courses, and from the beginning, first class, before some of them, they didn't know me even, right? Of course, I told them I'm an Israeli, I'm Jewish, and I immediately told them you're entitled, to your views, as long as you know what you're talking about, etc., etc. But they're going to be our next leaders, NYU, Harvard, Columbia, Princeton.
Or reporters.
They are going to be the next, how you say it, the leaders of the minds. And I don't know what I can do. Because, I'm there in the classroom. What can I do? Or what you will do?
I don't know what's going on in classrooms in our universities today. You do. I don't think I have any advice to give you.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah, what do you do?
Well, I thought maybe it's too much, because in the beginning I reminded them almost every class that they have to do a research, because they are students. They are filmmakers. You cannot write a story, either documentary or fiction or animation, without doing some research about, your plot, But then I think, so then I wanted to ask what they think. And one of them said, oh, well, it's not really for our class. Just teach us, the subtext. The other one said softly genocide, which means I'm part of genocide. Third one just came with a kafia to class. She was with a kafia. And I was just asking her, are you coming before or after the protest? And she said, oh, I just came from a protest. So even though I try to give them the tool of, try to understand what it is. When I ask them what river, from the river to the sea.
What I've discovered when I do talk to young people, and I get into what maybe they would consider a debate, where they have no answers.
No.
They will resort to ad hominem attacks. They'll say, well, you're just engaged in logocentrism, or that's just whataboutism. I used to practice law. That's what lawyers do. Whataboutism. We go to court and we argue before a judge. Judge, the Supreme Court has held this in this case, and so you are bound by that in this case. That's what the entire practice of law is. Whataboutism is about analytical reasoning, but you start to use analytical reasoning or logic in a way that the left can't respond, and then they just start calling you names in a sort of a tautology, instead of engaging in an actual conversation. And let's see if we can resolve some things.
I'm not sure if we're allowed to have politics in the class. I don't know. I never ask. I just talk. I don't care.
But this is not politics. The question is, when you talk about freedom of speech, how flexible can you be in order to bring the old founders up to date and according to the situation today? And how do you play it or how do you present it, or how do you watch it? Because you can't, whatever was so many years ago maybe was a good foundation, but things had changed.
Yeah. Tzili, you make another good point. Social media has allowed for intense acceleration of information. What used to take, say, a decade to slowly work its way through, say, academia, think tanks, the general public, so that we could resolve something in a methodical, calm way. What happened in 10 years now takes place over the course of 24 hours.
Mhm.
This rapid cycle where everybody digs in immediately and starts calling the other side names, and we can't have calm, deliberative conversations anymore. But that's why I still lean very heavily toward free speech. There's a well-known anti-Semite white nationalist who was banned from Twitter, and Elon Musk has now just let him back on. He's got a very tiny following. Yeah, and I think most of these guys live in their grandmother's basements, and don't have jobs or something. But he has free speech rights, as offensive as his statements are. But every time he speaks, decent people push back on him very aggressively. I think that's the best we can do. Allow more speech, allow more free speech. And when people say offensive things, allow people to contradict it.
But since there's no guideline and nobody knows what's true and what's false, and nobody really
It's another aspect.
Around 10 years ago, I was involved in some project, and a much younger generation that I am took care of it, and they were looking for a way to handle the PR. And I overheard their conversation on the phone. I didn't say a word. And I was listening to see how they sabotage the whole thing, only trying to get a better PR, losing the core of the whole situation. And eventually I asked them, what are you doing? Well, this will sell well. I said, yes, but you're killing your project. You don't understand what you're doing. And I feel that not understanding or not digging in or not making the right connection and just keep going and going and going, this gives a very, very false information, and the freedom of speech allows everything to take place. So something is a little bit messy here.
Yeah, but it's easier. For the students, it's even easier because, when in my class, one of the first things I ask them about what they write, what's your intent? What are you asking? What you're looking at? What do you want to look at, write this story? Intent. In this case, now with the protest, it's very easy. You killed 30,000 people, Gaza. They don't even remember what happened. They don't really care.
It's not even about Gaza.
So
it's because they want to be part of it.
That's a big question. Is it about Gaza or not? But the point is that the intent, they think they have the intent all out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Genocide, 30,000 people, occupation, they have the sound bites.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helped them to push forward.
Yeah, there were two things that our founders were always nervous about, at the founding of our nation. One is whether the people would be virtuous, that democracy is only suitable for a virtuous people, people who, generally speaking, can discern right from wrong, try to discern right from wrong, try to be decent human beings. And the other was knowledge, education. Thomas Jefferson believed in a robust education program for our country. There's some libertarians who don't want the government involved in funding schools at all. But that was not Thomas Jefferson's view. He thought it was really important for the government to provide funding, to subsidize schools, and to have a well-educated population. And those two things are so important. Virtuous, decent human beings who are knowledgeable. And with information flowing so rapidly now with social media, it's easy for people to believe they're knowledgeable, educated, when they don't even have a skim coat of knowledge. And their virtue, their sense of right and wrong, comes from TikTok. Right. These are two really dangerous things, and I don't know what we do about it.
What do you expect from President Biden?
Well, look, he's focused on one thing right now, and that's winning re-election. And his poll numbers continue to go south. So I don't think that this is probably what you wanted me to do, provide political analysis, but I can do that. I'm part of the swamp here in Washington, D.C. But for him to be reelected, he needs two things right now. And he's going to double down on his efforts to make sure that Donald Trump is convicted in at least one court, because he's losing badly right now in the swing states. And so I think he wants the picture of Donald Trump in handcuffs. And the second thing he really needs to do is get his base turned out. And it's pretty obvious that to do that, he's focusing on abortion policy, to try to get young women and suburban moms, coming out to vote in record numbers.
Right. Tell me something. Just so a president can be elected in prison?
Yeah, there are only two things that is required to be a candidate and to be elected president. One, you got to be 35 years of age, and you have to be born a U.S. citizen. And beyond that,
so they never envisioned, a situation like that, right?
Well, Donald Trump's not going to be, incarcerated going into the election. He could be convicted, but of course, in this New York court. But there are so many legal problems connected to this case so far. It'll instantly go on appeal, and of course, he will not be incarcerated, pending appeals. But he may be in handcuffs for 5 minutes, and that's what Joe Biden needs: pictures of the president handcuffed.
It's weird. We live here in a big democracy. Israel is democracy. Both have them on countries, Trump and Netanyahu. They're on trial. They're still governing. I mean, Trump is not governing now, but wants to govern again. There is no way to stop them.
Yeah, we see this all over the world. In Korea, whoever is the elected president tends to indict the previous president. In Brazil, we've seen this effort. In Italy, all over the world, we've seen this. As an American, I can say it's shocking to see it come to our shores.
Right.
This is just so.
But in Israel, I think that the protest were able to stop the revolution.
Not really.
Yeah, they stopped. Now it's not. They cannot really do much. I mean, they did went against very hard against the Supreme Court.
They're just working quietly, but they're still working on it. Unfortunately.
But at least there's a big force that would try to stop, and I don't see it here. I don't see here on the street people trying to, make America great again, but not what's the way it is now. What the Trump pushing make America great again, and people are really going for him. I don't know how you can witness all this, being a lawyer, and I'm sure decent lawyer who really care about law and and morals, and I don't know how can you witness all this.
Well, so I pointed out something that was a bit surprising when jury selection was moving forward in this Trump case in Manhattan. I used to practice law in New York, and so I know sort of the typical trial schedule in the New York court system. Usually it's Monday through Thursday, and then no trials are conducted Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. And Judge Merchan in this Trump case established a very bizarre schedule. Monday, Tuesday, and then off on Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday. And I couldn't understand why would the judge set such a weird schedule. And then suddenly it dawned on me. The biggest group of supporters in terms of the ratio of support for Donald Trump in Manhattan would be Orthodox Jews. And while Shabbat, Sabbath, does not begin until sundown, as you probably know, observant men are in temple well before sundown.
Right.
And if you're an observant woman with a
They
family,
sabotage it.
you know, you're busy on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday just getting ready.
Right.
There's no way an observant Jewish
It's amazing.
person in Manhattan would be able to serve on that jury. And on that very first day of jury selection, the media reported that there were 9 individuals who said that their schedules would not permit serving on a jury, but we don't know who those 9 are. I would not be surprised if some of them were observant Jews,
Wow.
but were excluded by Judge Merchan by establishing this crazy schedule.
Can it be? Can a judge? I mean, so
It is
who
happening.
do we trust? Doesn't matter if it's Trump or not Trump. It's you ever, you either, have a compass or you're not. You have your integrity or not. Doesn't matter for whom, right? It doesn't work
Yeah.
for you. I have integrity, and for you, I don't have integrity.
Yeah.
Wow. Anybody believe what you said and think the same?
Well, I know that I tweeted that out, and Donald Trump's attorneys then actually, I don't know if they, well, President Trump did retweet me, so maybe his attorneys did learn this idea from me, and they brought it to the judge.
Right.
And the judge then said, well, I promise that people will be able to observe Passover. Like, well, that wasn't really the issue. The issue was every Friday, not just Passover. You can make amends for Passover, but that does not help an observant Jew for the
Right.
rest of this multi-week trial.
Right.
Then is there still room to some extent to be proud that the US will be proud in their freedom of speech?
And what can you do?
Yeah, and CP, I assume when you're asking what can you do, you're asking sort of the universal you. What can we all do?
No?
No, what can I do? Well, I
No.
fight every day for free speech.
Yeah, but what tools do you have?
Okay, well, I work with members of Congress. I work with state attorneys general, secretaries of state, the public, to try to get the public aware of what's going on and get them activated to contact their elected officials. We also put pressure on big tech. You know, we issued a report a month and a half ago about Google's interference in elections, silencing speech, and then 2 weeks ago issued a similar report about Facebook. You know, these are incredible platforms that create lots of value and utility, but when they use their platform to try to upend our rights, that is when things are no longer acceptable or viable. That is so harmful to us as a society, and it harms democracy. So there are a number of things we do. We haven't even talked about artificial intelligence.
I was supposed to get there.
Yeah, hey, AI, as bad as social media has been, per Tzili's comments, having it supercharged with artificial intelligence magnifies that risk.
Right.
So what's your
how do you babysit the freedom of speech in the right way all the time?
Well, the right way, I can tell you that the way I believe that our First Amendment needs to be protected is by recognizing that even offensive speech should be protected. It used to be the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, that they would actually have their lawyers defend KKK members and their rights to march in the streets. And there was the famous line that the ACLU would always say, I may disagree with, but I'll die to protect your right to say it. Well, ACLU no longer has that motto. They don't see the value of speech and our First Amendment for its inherent virtue, even when it's abused by some. But look, we're fallible creatures. We're all going to make mistakes. I don't think that you eliminate a right simply because some people abuse it. It has to be that we protect this right and then try to encourage people to be better human beings. But Tzili, I think what I can do is what I've been doing. Fighting to get our policymakers, decision makers to be active in this space. We have here at the Media Research Center, we've filed petitions with federal agencies, just recently with the Federal Communications Commission, trying to block the purchase of a large band of radio stations that would be used for political purposes and deny people their free speech rights. So it's, I'm trying to fight on every front to protect individual rights, because ultimately that's what's going to be best for our country. And it used to be a bipartisan belief. Right now, there's only one Democrat in the entire House of Representatives who still believes in free speech. Ro Khanna of California probably disagrees with me on almost every other major policy issue, including Israel, but he still strongly believes in the value of free speech and its necessity for our society.
Right.
So, before we let you go, I guess, are you worried about what's happening with anti-Semitism in America, in Europe and America? It's not just here.
My family has been, my family, I mean, my side of the family, not my wife's side of the family. My family has been surprised at the extent of anti-Semitism, shocked by it and fearful. And I tell them, it's always been there. This has just been a triggering event to expose what's always been underneath the surface. So in some respects, we've outed them. We now, the whole world can see who the enemy is of decency. They've been exposed. Now it's easier to plan our strategies to win the day. Decency must win.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
I think we should stop on this positive note. Well, we support you, and I hope you'll have all the strength to fight for it.
Seems to me like
it's so important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
It
both
was
so
so
much.
nice to meet you.
It's really good meeting you.
I was really inspired.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
And we'll have you both over for Shabbat sometime, okay?
Right.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay, take care.
And see you all next week.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.